Welcome to the second edition of the podcast. Um, Today we'll be meeting Kartik, and he's outstanding. His passion for the dream of space, the work that he's doing with Satsearch, making sure we procure better, it's just a great segue into how are we going to make space a commodity. And this starts by the satellite world, making sure that vendors and buyers, engineers and managers, people that have needs for satellite parts or that have needs for services, get the right thing on the right time. We address things like why is it taking so much time to satisfy a need? 2 years to have a satellite on orbit? Too much time. Why can't we find the right part? Why can't we share things? And a critical takeaway, really important, the space mindset. Kartik will go through all of this. Thank you for your time. I, you are in Europe, I'm in the US, so I guess it's a bit more late in there. Thanks for coming to the recording. I'm going to dismiss any kind of alerts in here. And Kartik, I would like to start this conversation from the moment you were in the Mars analog. What do people do in the Mars analog? Can you give an idea of that?
Sure. So thanks again for inviting me to have a chat. And it's quite a big topic, I would say, because of course there's quite a few groups around the world that are doing these kind of Mars analog simulations. So the purpose of these simulations is really to help us understand how to think about having people walk around on Mars, and whether it's for a short stay, long stay. And there's a lot of complexity involved in that. So these simulations are intended to be like lower fidelity test beds where a lot of experimentation can be done. Everything from like testing how people interact in and deal with isolation or pressure to technical stuff like equipment, communication protocols, to just doing science. You know, what kinds of instruments could you take with you? What kinds of science could astronauts on Mars do? So I had the good fortune of participating in two of these missions through an organization called the Austrian Space Forum, based in Innsbruck.
Okay.
A not-for-profit, volunteer-based citizen science organization. There are other organizations in the world that do, stuff related to Mars analog, but let's say the specialization of this group in Austria is to focus on the operational basis on Mars. So what we do in these missions is you have a mission support center on Earth, and there's a very good reason why it's called a mission support center as opposed to a control center. I can come to that in a second.
Okay.
And essentially, every day in these missions, the idea is you're replicating what a day will look like on Mars, but also on Earth, because a mission that's conducted on Mars is not going to be only conducted on Mars. It's going to be conducted on Earth as well, meaning a lot of people supporting an endeavor like that. So I had the fortune of being an analog astronaut in two of these missions, which meant I got to serve as the eyes and ears and hands of actually a couple of hundred people, you know, who were behind this mission to deploy experiments, conduct exercises in the field, study different types of environments. And what we did in these missions was really to, in real time, have an operational loop to study how to execute something like this successfully, what are the possible failure modes, how to optimize things, where new solutions are needed.
Okay.
And so I did this in two instances. One was a shorter mission, which was on a glacier in Austria, mimicking a polar landing on Mars, because the poles of Mars have ice caps.
Yep.
So that was one environment. And then the other environment was in Oman, in the Dhofar region in the desert.
Yes.
for about a month. And that was, let's say, mimicking, this life in isolation. And so we had a small crew out in the middle of nowhere, in sort of a fairly self-sustaining environment, setup in a inhospitable environment. And the goal of the mission was then every day to kind of run through operational life, both on Mars and on Earth for a mission like that. So,
Kartik, man, you have a set of pictures that are extremely cool. It's like you are on Mars. And I have a couple of questions on this. You talked about understanding gaps that can then hopefully be used for space missions. Do you know, that is, are these gaps being utilized, or is this not being utilized? How does like your experience then goes back to NASA, as Emirates, whoever is doing that? Do you know how does that work? I don't know. That's why I'm really like, there is a lot of data from there for sure.
Yeah, well, so the specific missions conducted by the Austrian Space Forum are set up very rigorously with a science plan and a science data dissemination plan. And in fact, out of these missions, there's usually also a slew of peer-reviewed journal papers, publishing the findings and things like that. So the purpose of these missions is indeed to gather new knowledge and to do scientific research on the basis of that and publish it for the benefit of the community, so that these kinds of observations, gaps, things like that are brought to the attention of the community, which the net effect of that should be enriching our understanding of what is required to conduct a human mission to Mars successfully and safely. So yeah, the Austrian Space Forum has quite a deep history in doing this. They've got, over a dozen missions that they've done like this, over a decade doing these kinds of experiments. And this is complementary to a lot of other organizations around the world that have been doing this kind of activity and are recently started as well. And it's all towards contributing towards what I would call the community understanding of what the ins and outs of doing something as adventurous as sending humans to Mars. And of course, in doing that, we accept risk. But I think the worst thing to do is to engage in a mission like that and not have done everything to mitigate the unknown unknowns. Like if you're dealing with risks that you can quantify and accept, it's different than if you just don't know what's out there. And part of these simulation missions is really to help canvas what are all the things we need to think about? What are the things we need to prepare for and need to quantify and think about?
Before we move on to more Satsearch, but I think this has to do with Satsearch as well. Do you have a story on that? Something that happened to you that was like, I didn't see this one coming, or an unknown? Do you have something that you could share?
Yeah, so I'll just give you an example. So as one of the things that the Austrian Space Forum has spent a lot of time and effort developing and is quite unique is their spacesuit simulators. So they have full-fledged spacesuits that are simulators of real spacesuits, and they have, an onboard computer and energy storage system and a thermal management system and, structural integrity to support the astronaut, but also mimics the effect of being in a pressurized suit, all of these kinds of things. So they put a lot of detailed energy into that. And a complex system like that, which is, always in effect, a system of systems, can fail in many different ways.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's one of the most complex things to study and to analyze. And in fact, it's the kind of thing that you need to put in operation, because you're not going to be able to, in general, theoretically, come up with all of the failure modes and the failure tree and everything. So you want to put it out in the world and watch what happens. So there was one incident in one of the missions where there was a little button on the suit that was used for communication purposes. And I don't know what my mental state was at the time. I think I was trying to get a lot of work done while we were out in the field. And I inadvertently put more pressure on the button than it was designed for, and the button broke, right?
Okay.
So when you're a designer and you think about designing that button, you might not think of the extreme situation in which somebody puts significantly more force on something like that than you would think of in everyday life. And this is an example of which, when you come back, you're like, oh, like I didn't realize we would have to think about that button possibly breaking. And in that case, actually, it was a very good example because not only did the button break, but we hot fixed it. So the team is really, really capable. And in fact, I ended up returning to the base, and like a Formula One car going into a pit stop, I came in and they quickly hot fixed, the button, and I could go straight back out. And this also gives you a sense of how to work under pressure, how to work in a team, so that one small event caused a ripple effect across the team that gave, I think, a lot of understanding in, okay, firstly, there are, design unknowns that we have to think about, or constraints on the design that we need to think about. And then secondly, imagine something like this happens in the field. Are we capable and able to deal with it immediately? Are we able to manage the risk? And that was successfully dealt with in situ, in real time. So this is just a small example. It's something that, you might not think of as the most important thing about a mission to Mars, but these are all the small details that matter when you're sending people out, hundreds of millions of kilometers away from the Earth.
And just the fact that you could have been alone out there, I don't know, 2 kilometers away, the button doesn't work, you want to communicate. Do we need to send a search team? Do I have a search team? There is a lot in the fault tree analysis that you could go on after, okay, the button, I cannot fix it. What should I do next?
Well, and this gives so this is where the design does come into play, something that was done well, which was that the suit has a backup communication system. In the eventuality that the primary comms loop doesn't work. And so in that moment, I immediately saw what the value was of that redundancy and that separate communication loop that was not, intertwined with the primary loop. So that's how we mitigated, the design mitigated also the risk in the field, because I was not cut off.
From the field. And was it in these missions that you also had more ideas for your company, for Satsearch? Did things start in there, or how did Satsearch begin?
I mean, all of these experiences in some way or another have formed ideas in my head about what we could help solve for in the industry through Satsearch, but this wasn't like the genesis of the company. The genesis of the company was actually something much more mundane, which was that as a systems engineer, as a space engineer, I have worked on a series of projects and doing a lot of design work, trade studies, things like that. And I think in 2015, I was working on a European project. It was a pretty interesting mission concept, and working with very intelligent people doing all kinds of complicated maths and physics and things like that. And it was like the nth time that I was doing a design study like this, where it suddenly struck me that a significant amount of my weekly time was being spent on something that felt distinctly low tech, which was just Googling for suppliers, trying to find information about components, trying to find out who offers what, trying to get in touch with them to get additional information, to get a quotation. So the genesis of Satsearch was simply, at some point, that problem bubbled up in my head, and I was like, look, for a frontier industry, where we're supposed to be thinking about sending people to Mars and setting up a lunar base and space tourism, surely the path to get there does not include me doing this Googling. That can't be the optimum. And so
yes.
Just that irritation and annoyance and believing that this simple mundane thing cannot be part of the future of the industry is what led us to Satsearch. Because I have two co-founders. I turned to the first co-founder who I started the project with, and the other one joined soon after. And so the co-founder who I initially started with, he doesn't have a space background. He's a software developer. And I described to him this problem, and he couldn't believe that space engineers, when I tried to tell him, like, as a space engineer, I'm wasting my time just clicking on Google links and like downloading PDF documents and, transcribing specifications into Excel spreadsheets or whatever it is. So he couldn't believe me. And then once I sort of explained to him, and we talked to a few people, and he could understand, like, okay, yeah, like this really seems to be it. I think we were both very annoyed by the idea that this was like anywhere near the way of the future. So it just felt like this problem needs to go away. And whether we do it or somebody else, the problem will go away, because I cannot imagine 50 years from now that that's how the industry is being productive, with people just clicking on
things. And
things.
Kartik, okay, segue to that is, do you still think people do that? I think so, okay, because I meet people all the time and they say, oh, I'm going to transfer the data from your model from here to an Excel sheet, and then I'm going to analyze it and I'm going to send it back to the model again. Okay, there is a bit of strange things happening. But what I'm saying is that, isn't that taking away the mind of people like you? And by the way, I forgot to say this. Kartik has at least one PhD, at least one master's degree, and he's been involved in so many missions. I'm going to link to your profile and LinkedIn in here. But what I'm saying is that, how much waste of time do you see this happening all over the world? Just an idea to see what plane is it out there.
I mean, we did some, like, through questionnaires and interviews with people trying to quantify this. It's hard because it's very intertwined in people's daily work. But I think I wouldn't be exaggerating to say that, you know, typically 20% of work life is spent on this kind of sourcing problem. If you're an engineer or somebody working, doing these kinds of design studies, trade studies. And the problem is that, you know, you might spend all of this effort procuring all of this information, and then you build your local spreadsheet and you put all the information. But,
yes,
you know, it's the kind of thing that has a half-life, because 30 days later, some of the information is not relevant anymore. 60 days later, even more information is outdated. And a year later, basically now you're like, maybe 80% of that spreadsheet has to be updated. So it is not just a one-off problem, it's a constant problem, because you need to, and it's important, because if you, in your design process, just use the wrong number, like the wrong mass, the wrong power, the wrong temperature range, it can manifest across the entire design, right? That it has consequences for all kinds of other design choices that are made. So there's critical importance somewhere there. And this is actually the reason why you see that in a lot of approaches, design methodologies, there is this approach of building margins on top of margins. You know, so I take a nominal mass value, but because it's very uncertain, I add 20% margin, and then because when I add numbers together, I don't know how those margins interact. I add a margin on top of the margin, and then you just end up with very fuzzy designs, you know, and very, very fuzzy numbers. So this is kind of solving the problem the other way around, which is to say, I don't have great information, so I'm going to solve it in my design by making the design fuzzy.
And by fuzzy, I think I'm reaching out to you. We're not talking about fuzzy logic. We are talking about increasing the mass of an object on and on, or whatever specifications it is, and probably this 20% of time that keep building up errors and mass and other things. So, and you said something very interesting in there, Kartik. That was, this type of thing gets intertwined with day-to-day work. So at a certain moment, you probably start assuming that, oh, this is my work. There is no more thinking about, there is a different way to do this. So I would like to ask you around Satsearch, and what is the difference in Satsearch versus other offerings, or saying that, oh, there is now a PLM, or a product lifecycle management system, or an ERP, enterprise resource thing. What does Satsearch, and I've seen what Satsearch is, then we talked about this earlier on, but I would like you to bring that up, because the value that you guys are bringing, and the coordination, cooperation, I'm going to call it equanimity as well, between the many forces in the industry. I would like you to bring that up on your own words.
Sure. Yeah, you know, I think you're hitting at the heart of also why. So if you ask me why what we are trying to do hasn't been done before, it is because of what you're raising, which turns out to be infinitely more complex than the technical problems or the operational problems is the fact that you're dealing with multiple forces and sometimes opposing forces that you're trying to bring together towards some productive resource or productive action. In this case, our goal is really to make it easier. To put it very bluntly, our focus is to try to make life easier for engineers, right, on a daily basis. Make it easier for engineers to get their work done. There's two reasons for that. Number one, because the genesis of this project, as I described before, was my experience as an engineer. So I have deep empathy for the engineer, and so in some way I'm biased towards saying, like, I want to help my fellow engineers, and so we're very focused on doing that on a daily basis because we have a deep understanding of the frustration that the engineer faces on a daily basis. And the second thing is, what we noticed after studying kind of all the stakeholders that are involved in making life easier for the engineer is the engineer kind of sits at the head of the table, because if you make life easier for the engineer, then projects get completed faster, satellites get launched faster, maybe they're more reliable, maybe, you know, downstream services get provisioned faster, more business there, as we talked about last time, there's more flow, right? So this is about creating flow. And in some sense, what is happening is, okay, you could talk about the fact that the flow itself can expand, and it's a growing market, the pie is growing, but even whatever flow is there is today getting constricted in different places. And one of the places is simply, I as an engineer, I don't know, let's say I'm looking for a battery for a CubeSat. Yep. There is like a pinch point there, because now I know what my design needs. I have some mission requirements, but how do I answer this question now? And in a way in which it is not disproportionate with all the other activities that I'm doing. And in fact, in my view, this is not the bit that you want the engineer to focus on, not the bit trying to figure out who provides batteries that meet my requirements. I think the engineer skill is around the decision-making, the trade study, the requirements analysis, the actual simulation. So what we kind of look at it as is, if we help the engineer, we reduce the bottleneck and increase the flow. And if you increase the flow, then the other side of the market, which is the sellers or the suppliers, not only do they get in the short term potentially more business, but that gives them the ability to think about business expansion. In other words, if I can reliably and predictably say, I'm going to sell one widget of whatever I sell every month, now I can start forecasting. Now I can start planning my investments. Now I can say, you know what, okay, so I have that, and I want to increase my capacity so that I can produce 2 widgets every month, because I can see that there's more demand in the market, there's more flow. In some sense, the problem that we're trying to solve is that the industry has been, in some sense, non-cooperative. So if you think of it in sort of like quadrants, it's in the non-cooperative corner, and we're trying to bring it into the cooperative corner. And that's not easy, because there's, of course, threats and weaknesses that appear if you do kind of a SWOT analysis of this for businesses and stakeholders in the market. So how do you get enough of these companies to come with you to see that value? I think that's been the challenge for us. And what we are trying to demonstrate is, so to put it more bluntly, what is not typical in this industry is to share information openly, either on the buy side or the sell side, because this is part of their SWOT analysis has led them to believe that the way we secure our place in the market is sharing as little as possible. And we're trying to push them into this other optimum, maybe the global optimum or a better optimum, which is more transparency and more information. And that's hard, because now you're trying to convince people to change their practices internally, externally.
And Kartik, if companies like, I'm going to call Toyota and the Nissan Group, and there is a huge sharing of platforms, chassis, breakers. Well, there was one moment in the market where almost everyone had the same airbag, to be fair. That's, well, with the problems of that. Kartik, breaking that, we talked about breaking that mental game of this is about the mentality in there. And every time that I think about that, I see that I'm more convinced on that sharing and co-opetition looks more interesting than closure. What, and I'm derailing on the script, but I'm really, Kartik, what are the practices that you've been using to kind of break down this silo mentality or this non-sharing mentality? How have you been doing that? Because man, I fully understand. I believe this is very hard, but I would really like to hear from you, because I think you set up an example for other young entrepreneurs or non-young, or to say we are going inside a silo market with a couple of 4 or 5 big players and hundreds or thousands of companies in here that need help. It's very easy for me to interpret the folks on the top and say, this is the right behavior. It's to be a cluster, to be closed. Kartik, how are you doing that, man? I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's a hard problem, and I don't claim to have a complete answer yet, or work in progress. So every day, this is kind of the challenge that we're facing, and we're trying to do it by learning as well from all our interactions with stakeholders on the market. I think there's 2 things that I can point to. One is, if you want people to behave in a certain way because you believe that it is for some greater good or even for their benefit, it's hard to do that if you're not reflecting that yourself, right? So if I'm telling somebody to share information openly because that will help drive their business and help the marketplace or whatever, I need to be ready to do that myself, because you have to kind of walk the walk if you're going to make that claim. So we try to, as a result, put our best foot forward and demonstrate the value of being open. And so when we are talking to stakeholders, we share with them what is happening with Satsearch and how the company is operating and what we're doing. That also builds the trust in the marketplace, right? Because ultimately, especially in this market, it is an end-to-end kind of marketplace, but where end on both sides is relatively small, it's still niche, right? It's not mass market B2C, and it's not even automotive shipping or logistics. Everyone kind of is an identifiable organization and individual still in the market. It's not just random purchase orders coming in. So there's a lot of relationship building that goes into that. And that means developing a level of trust by engaging at grassroots with people and sharing with them how you think about the world, what your model of the world is, where you think the world is going, and how you're trying to facilitate that. And in fact, I would say that has won over many companies that in the first instance perhaps had a skeptical view towards what we were doing, because we took the time to say, you know what, if I want to persuade you of my view of the future, then it's on me to put the effort in to lay out to you where that comes from. And if I, don't do that intentionally and genuinely, then it's hard for me to expect for you to make the leap of faith. So one is this thing, it's just investing in, and there's no shortcuts to that. It's just been, spending hours and hours talking to people and building those relationships. Okay. The other piece of this is thinking about the marketplace itself. And I think what is kind of, and it's almost trivial to say it, but it is, on one side it's trivial because it's easy to see. On the other side, it's hard because it is changing behavior in the industry. If you look at our website, there is a very conscious reason why if you land up on the website, you can start searching immediately. There's no login screen. You don't have to identify yourself. Yes. Because part of our vision here is, look, at the end of the day, what we are trying to help is engineers get access to information. So the worst possible way we could do that is by gating the information. And so this is a way for us to drive this flow, right? And in other words, we could be arguing for all kinds of futures, but the easiest way for us to demonstrate it was to put it in action. And so that's why the website's open, people use it. And this means that besides our ideas and our vision, we're able to back it up with fact, the fact that the marketplace is open, the fact that products and services or SKUs are discoverable, the fact that engineers can engage with suppliers. That's a way that we can manifest. Otherwise, it's like I tell you to be open, but what evidence am I showing you that is the way forward?
And you mentioned a good point because Right now, and we haven't talked about product development or things, but right now, the engineer still, and I was thinking about this when, that is, I as an engineer, I have a need for a part, correct? I have a need for a part. I look at the technical specifications that come from the mission design, and here I go. I go to my selected list in my company if I have it. If I have it, if I don't have, I need to Google it. And I have a myriad of options, or 5 or 7 suppliers. And I start going into all of those details until, like you said, you get a quote. What I've seen is that I truly believe that you are cutting a lot of the right side of the process, that is the many options, by providing, hey, you need a battery pin, here it is. Here are the 7 more detailed. So that first touch point is really having a concern for the customer. That's what I'm listening for you. And that is a human concern, correct? Like I've been in those shoes, so I wanted to emphasize that it's easy to see from when you say you recall that experience as I don't want to be there again, and it's like bringing the solution to that problem. I would like to ask you the following, as a segue to this. When you started building, as you keep on building Satsearch, what is the best practice that an entrepreneur should have, or a set of best practices, Kartik, that you talked about building relationships, making it easier for the customer? Are there other things that, like when you're looking at your machine, the machine of Satsearch, or the life that an entrepreneur needs to have, Kartik, how to make this easier, if it's possible to be easier? I don't know.
Yeah, I understand your question, and before I give my answer, I just want to caveat this, because I have always a fear that when answering questions like this, you kind of put yourself on a pedestal, like I'm a guru. I want to say that that's not the case. I can only speak from the data point of us running a company and the day-to-day experiences. This is just because I think I do the same, and I think anybody listening should, is to take it, whatever anyone says, with a pinch of salt and validate it yourself. And I think that's just good common sense. Having said that, I think the one thing that we have learned that is, at the same time, the easiest thing to hear and understand and the hardest thing to execute on, which is to focus on solving somebody's problem. It's a very trivial thing, right? So what is the company doing? If a company is doing a good job, they're typically solving somebody's problem. And this is why if you go into like startup literature, you have all the stuff like product market fit and, or problem solution fit and all of that stuff. Without getting into, let's say, the frameworks and the structures, I think what it boils down to is whose problem are you solving, and how do you know that you're solving it, and can you continue to solve it, or are you fully solving it? And being obsessed with that, I think, is key. And it's very easy to get distracted away from it because it's seemingly so trivial, but in reality, very, very hard to do and to stay focused on continuously. The propensity is to do other stuff. And so there's always and what we've learned is kind of a self-correcting process inside the company to always pull us back and say, wait, why are we doing this? Like, are we helping our end user or the person that we're trying to solve the problem for by doing this? And I think there's many people, let's say from the Silicon Valley elite, who kind of preach this. And I think it's not without reason that this has come to be the sort of the mantra, which is, solve somebody's problem. I think Jeff Bezos has this whole thing, that he, within Amazon, consistently pushed for people to be customer obsessed, like obsessed with the customer. That's as far as I understand, that is what Jeff Bezos installed in the DNA of Amazon. And I think that is, like, singly, if I had to say anything, if somebody asked me, like, what is the most important thing to do as a founder, it would be that. It's just focus on making sure every day you're doing something for your customer or your user or whoever or
How
interacting
does
with.
that play out in your, I'm going to call it the space entrepreneur routine? Do you start by, what are the tactics behind that? That is it in the morning? Is it every day? Do you have a plan time? What is the underlying, in your case, with the caveats that you explained? You talked about also a self-correcting process that is, hey, why am I doing this? In my case, it's like, man, going to bed, I was like, I need to solve this problem. That's my case. And I wake up in the morning sometimes like 5 a.m. and it's like, man, that thing is not sorted yet. This thing needs to be done. But it's not always, okay, being truly transparent, it's not always at the same time. It's not always the same thing, but I make an effort. So I'd like to hear from you. Do you have anything, because your company is already, I'm going to say, guys, are around here, the curve, okay? What's a tactic behind that?
Yeah, so I'll mention two things. On a personal level, like in my day-to-day work, I have learned that you can almost never go wrong by being helpful. So as with anybody else in this kind of digital work or any work, I guess most people are stuck behind their computer, especially with the pandemic. Every day means sitting behind your computer. And one of the things is you have an inbox that fills with people who are emailing you. And so I try now to make sure that in every email that I'm replying, I am being helpful to the other party. This is one way to just install in my head that part of this is building user experience, customer experience, partner experience. And it's a way for me to put almost goodwill out into the world for whatever it's worth. But it also keeps me focused, regardless of whether any individual email then results in something. It means then that I have in my daily process just thinking about, okay, how can I help this person? What can I do? To give you an example of something besides emails is, since part of our primary goal is to help engineers find stuff, part of our daily work is just to make sure, for instance, that there is more stuff to find. So we are constantly working to expand our database, to work with suppliers, to get more data into the database, because with every unit of data that we add into the database, we're performing an action that is potentially helping a user. So this is a simple way to install, and this is how I can say this is a priority task, because I know no matter what I do, if I put this bit of information inside the database and it's discoverable through the website, it has a potential to help somebody.
Okay. And that is a daily thing, correct, Kartik? That is a daily task, enriching the offer and focusing on replying with goodwill.
Yeah, it is. I'm not suggesting that it is done exactly 100% correctly every day. As I said, there's many forces that pull on you and you get pulled aside. And this comes to your second question, which is the self-correcting process.
Yes, exactly.
And the self-correcting process, actually more than anything, this is where I have noticed the value of team. And when you have a very strong team with deep trust between the people in the team, this is where you can rely on the team to have this sort of self-correcting process embedded. So when I am doing something and I'm getting blinded and I'm going off into a corner, I can trust in the fact that one of the people in my team will ping me at some point and be like, Kartik, like, what are you doing and why are you doing it? Like, there's these other things you should be doing. And then we talk it out. And sometimes, you'll have a reason and you come to a compromise and say, okay, yeah, that's worth doing, but probably only for like an hour. Like, don't waste more time on that. So that's part of, let's say, the strength of having a team, that if you can have multiple people that have deep enough trust to even question each other, where I feel comfortable enough to question one of my team members and say, wait, why are you doing that? And they feel that equally, then you have some sort of protection layer inside the organization.
That's very interesting. Kartik, as you moved into all of these lives, okay, in exploring Mars on Earth, on doing work as an engineer, was there a specific, I'm going to call it failure, that set you up for success? And in this case, is there like a failure that you say, this is my favorite one because it made a big difference to what I am now and what I'm trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost a question of which failure do I pick to talk about,
Okay.
right? You know, I think that's part of also what I have learned in this whole startup journey, that failures are good because they help you sort of understand the landscape that you're operating in. And, you know, you want to know, if I step in this direction, am I going to fall off the cliff, or is there actually a path there?
Okay.
So just as a meta comment, like, I have learned that failures are actually kind of an awesome thing, especially if you can make them cheap, right? If they don't have huge consequences,
Okay.
then cheap failures are great because they just give you a little bit more. So somebody described it to me like this, which is, you know, building a company is almost like you step into a dark room and there's furniture and there's, you know, there's like maybe a lion in the room, but there's also a pot of gold, and you're just trying to feel your way around. And maybe you'll never find the pot of gold, and maybe you get eaten by the lion, or maybe you might stay out of the way of the lion. But
it's a great
so these failures are, you don't want to step right into the mouth of the lion, but maybe you trip over some furniture and you hurt yourself, you get up and you're like, okay, I know that furniture is there now, I won't go near that. So that's just to give kind of the meta comment. And to give you a specific example, I guess, you know, early on in a company's life, at least in a quote unquote startup, which is a whole other topic of what that word even means, but let's go with the word startup.
Yes.
There's a lot of confusion, especially if you're doing it for the first time, about what should you be actually doing. For instance, should you be building products? Should you be talking to users? Should you be fundraising? Should you be pitching? Should you be going to, should you be doing marketing? Should you? And I think the failure that I wouldn't really call a failure, because we did learn from it, was to understand that, I'll give you an example, proposal writing for European Commission grants can be great. You know, they can give you access to non-dilutive funds and access to certain networks and an ability to grow your company, but they are not obligatory, because what is obligatory for a company rather is to solve a problem for a paying customer, right? That's the main thing that you need to be able to do. And I think the quote unquote failure was in the beginning to feel overwhelmed, thinking, oh, like all of these other companies are getting like EU grants and doing this, and we should also be applying. And going through that process and, you know, applying a couple of times and maybe not, you know, and not getting through to the final stages or whatever, forced us to think about, but wait a second, I just spent a month writing this proposal. Was that the thing I should have been doing? And on reflection, we have learned to be much more purposeful. So I'm not saying that these things are not useful, but not to look at them as de facto, you know, you have to do that. Okay. Instead, now we look at it as just one more tool that you could use. And instead, what we learned from that is what you have to do is build your business, which means talk to your customers and solve their problems. Yeah.
And Kartik, something has been popping up in my mind in here that is, and we have a kind of inside one question is, how did you end up with a team? That is, how did you build it? Because we've been talking about this, but it's coming back to the team and not working alone. And at least that's what I hear from you. How is it serendipity? Is it not? Kartik, how is this? And how do you know that you need to hire? Well, but let's go in the first one. That is, how did you guys get together? And that's it, you know, like, what's the sauce?
Yeah, so the team that we have now, it originally started, as I said, between myself and one of my two co-founders. Honestly, by that time, I had tried a couple of other ideas prior to that. And those ideas didn't even get to a point to know that the ideas weren't good or there was no market, because we discovered that in the team, we didn't all want the same thing. So I had this experience of getting burnt by, oh, like this idea is cool, but this person doesn't see it like me, or doesn't believe, you know, going in this direction or working this way, or even the ambition was the same. So when we started Satsearch, actually, we didn't start Satsearch. I approached one of my co-founders and I said, look, I want to do something and build something, but instead of deciding what to build and then deciding who to build it with, I want to flip the script. I want to figure out who I want to work with, and then we figure out what we build.
Okay.
So I approached my co-founder and I said, look, you and I get along well. We've known each other for a long time by then. And I could write code, he could write code. And so I told him, why don't we just do something? I don't know what it is yet, but we get along well enough. And I think we could do something interesting just for fun more than anything. We wasn't even talking about building a company. In fact, we spent an evening, and I still have that master list where we spent an evening we first made the decision we're going to do something, and that something was undefined. And then we spent an evening writing down all the crazy ideas we had in mind. And in fact, the idea that is at the core of Satsearch was the third thing in the list. And so we came into it, and we had all kinds of crazy, wild ideas to do. So in some sense, Satsearch was just a consequence of us deciding to do something and brainstorming, rather than saying we're going to build a company and I want to build it, with this person. It was I want to work with this person, whatever it is. And once we started building Satsearch, I think we learned that gave us an insurance policy, because at any time at which something was going wrong, we could look at each other and say, but you know what? The essence here is that we want to work together. It doesn't matter that all of this stuff is happening. So that has kept the team together. And in fact, very soon after that, I invited my other co-founder into the team, because I'd also known him for a long time. And all I knew was I'd like to work with him. So on the basis of that, I just decided, look, I don't know how we're going to work all of this out, but I can imagine spending time with you, and I can imagine spending time with you. And that's what the essence of the team is. And we've talked many times about, if Satsearch made a pivot, or if we had chosen another thing on that original list, we might have been doing something else.
Okay.
But what would have been consistent is the team in this case, because none of us came into it with the purpose of saying that it's Satsearch that we're going to do. It was more, we want to work together, and that's why we're coming together.
Okay, that's really cool, and the fact that you guys are sticking together. And do you plan? This is probably. I heard and I've seen in my life that hiring is one of the hardest things. There is this idea that we should hire slow and we should fire quick. I have no idea if it is right, because the samples that I have from hiring people, they both diverge. Sometimes I hired quickly and it worked really well. Sometimes I hired slow, it worked really well, and then both of them work really bad as well. So do you how is your growth plan in your head in terms of team? How is that playing out?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we're kind of hitting that juncture now also with our growth. So it's something, this is why every day is a new challenge, right? Because the organization evolves, and it's like an organism, and you have to adapt to the organism. And now the organism needs more resources. It's hungry for resources, including people. So I don't have a fully formed idea about this, since we're starting on this journey now, and we've had some experiences over the last couple of years in this direction. But I do believe one thing fundamentally, based on what I know right now, which is hiring is rarely, from what I have seen, about the specific skill sets of the people involved. Maybe in a highly operationalized environment in which you need somebody to just come in and they're plugging something into the machine, then it's really about the line item in the CV, like, can you write Python code or whatever it is. But I think at the stage that we are, and probably most companies that are of a smallish size, what supersedes that is this intangible thing about, and it almost sounds cliche, but how somebody fits in your culture as an organization. And it's very hard to test for or to quantify, I think, but it is something that I believe is worth trying to investigate. In fact, I think probably a lot of organizations miss great talent because they are so rigid in having to look for somebody that meets certain job vacancy requirements, right? 3+ years of whatever it is, this programming language. But that's almost never, I think, the thing that matters for successful hiring. Again, I'm not a recruiter, so I don't have enough data points for this. But at least from anecdotal evidence, I feel like picking somebody who fulfills the way that you work internally. For instance, in Satsearch, we are very open and honest with each other.
Okay.
So somebody who is high on open communication is ready to voice their opinion and to say, look, I don't think it's like this, I think it's like this, and willing to engage in that dialogue is probably a better fit for us than somebody who doesn't share their opinion, where it's a lot more effort to get to understand what they are thinking and what they want. I'm not saying it's impossible, and that person could fit in one way or another, but at least based on where we are today, I think somebody, based on the DNA of how we are set up, somebody who is almost an overt communicator will probably fit well in the organization, because that's part of the DNA of how we deal with things internally.
And Kartik, picking up on that, are there specific, I'm going to call it books, but it could be movies, it could be paintings, it could be an exhibition, because come on, you live in a place that has a lot of cultural differences and diversity, and you can not only learn from books, but let's talk about books, for example, and any other source that made a big influence on you and that probably can steer people in the direction of that culture.
Yeah, I'm going to be, as I am often the case, I'm going to be a little bit the contrarian, because I know that there are lots of great books and people have lists of books that they read, and I could probably mention books, but honestly, I feel like the kind of things that have shaped me more are people in my direct environment.
Okay.
Whether it is family, whether it is close friends, whether it is colleagues from, previous roles or whatever. I do believe in a lot of ways that we are, as humans, just very strongly impacted and shaped by the environment that we are in, and the people around us. So it's in that sense also not scalable, because the person that impacted me,
Yes.
is perhaps living in my house, is not somebody that I can transfer to you and say that person can impact you. So I'm more. So the trouble that I have with like books, especially on this topic, not that they are not useful, but I feel a little bit like people end up putting certain individuals in society on a pedestal. Like, this is an amazing human being who has an amazing, and I feel like maybe that's because I grew up here in the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands there's sort of like this culture of everyone is
different.
equal.
Yeah, exactly. It's different.
So I find it hard when it spills over into like this demigod, and I'm looking up to this person who is my guru or whatever. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to give any specific names of people or things, because I feel like that goes down that rabbit hole that I'm a little allergic to.
Understood. But is there any, because I know a couple of books that you've got behind you. Calculus, I know it well. Statistics, I know it well as well. And a couple of them, they are also in my shelf back in Portugal. A couple of them took a lot of time to work through that, but they are more manuals. So you would say that people have influenced you much more than these books?
I would say, as an example, there was a professor who, during my master's degree, who gave a course in astrodynamics. And he's like a legend. He's very, everybody in the faculty of aerospace engineering in Delft knows him. And he had, I think, that very strong impact on all the students he taught, because he was just very inspirational. He generated a sense of curiosity, and I would look to him as somebody who just impacted me, because he gave me some sense of like awe and curiosity about this topic and wanting to learn more about it. And, that's an individual person, and it's then not necessarily a book or something. It's the fact that I had the experience of sitting in the classroom with him,
What's his name, so that I can pull him up, or at least refer. Do you still recall?
Yeah, so his name, Professor Karel, so Karel, very typically Dutch name, I guess, or yes. Northern European name. Wakker, Wakker, Professor Wakker.
Okay.
He's very well known in Delft in the Faculty of Aerospace Engineering. If anybody mentions Professor Wakker, he was also the dean of the university and stuff. So he's quite a well-known figure at the university. And he taught for many years this course 2-part course on astrodynamics. And it was just it was the kind of class that if you saw it in your schedule in the morning, you're like, I'm looking forward to going to this class. And that's one example, right? So I feel like these type of people shape me more.
Yeah, Kartik, I understand that truly. I have lots of interesting books, but there were professors that shaped my life. They make your, let's go to, I had, calculus 1, 2, 3, and 4, like everyone. And calculus 1 was terrible. Calculus 2 is calculus, back at my college in the US university. That's the name that we call in there. The same thing. And then suddenly this professor comes in and is giving calculus 3, that is derivatives and Stokes diagrams and Stokes theorem. And the classes were amazing. It's like, how very inspirational in the utilization of maths for day-to-day, instead of, I would say, instead of just simple mathematics, but being able to translate conceptual things from maths into day-to-day things, and the classes were just great. I was like, I'm loving it, and so I understand we have this idea that books have all the things, but sometimes we forget that. So that I'm very thankful that you broke down the pattern. I would like to ask a couple more things as we move on. What is the advice? No, more of these. What is a bad recommendation that you see in this area? Process is less important, or technology, or people, or anything that you say, this is really a bad recommendation that you've seen in the SAT world, or in the entrepreneurial world, but I would like to focus more on the SAT domain in there.
So you mean in the space world, or you mean in startups?
In the space world. In this case, okay. You can get the work that you do in the satellite community. What kind of bad recommendations do you see people giving that they shouldn't follow?
That's a hard one to think about. I wouldn't necessarily classify anything as bad, but I think what misdirects people, okay, maybe that's the better framing that I would put, is that a lot of people are enthusiastic about the space industry because this pie is perceived to be growing, right? And there's a lot of graphs out there with a kind of hockey stick curve and the growth of the industry, and it's going to, I think Morgan Stanley has a report that's been cited over and over that, by the end of this decade, it's going to exceed $1 trillion in size, the sector. And I understand the purpose of those kinds of studies and projections and things like that, and the value of them, but I think they are much more limited in value than people think they are. In other words, this 10,000 meter view of the industry, that it's all growing and it's all like money is flowing everywhere and everyone's super happy, is missing the finer detail that there are problems to be solved, there are bottlenecks, there are things to be sorted out. And I wouldn't call it bad. That's why I'm saying it's not bad advice, because I think people discover one way or another, they start working, that reality is not, it's not 1, 2, 3, okay, the industry's growing, so everything's going to work out. So I think people quickly figure it out that, they need to go beyond just looking at the curve.
Okay.
But I do think more for the rest of society, it doesn't do justice to the problem set and the opportunity in the space industry in my mind. I think there's much more nuance to it than just everything's going up and, the industry's growing and more satellites are being launched. There are real challenges that need to be met for instance, from a commercial perspective. Okay. And there are real opportunities. And I think, those graphs, if they are misappropriated, don't do justice to that. And again, those graphs have a place, and they're used in a certain fashion, but I see them used and abused and overused, in all kinds of different fashions. And it sort of grinds away at me, because I think, okay, but, do we really want to be just showing this graph constantly to people about the industry and not opening the nuance of the problem set and where the challenges lie, where the opportunities lie.
Kartik, is this where you find your day-to-day grit in that problem solving? That is essentially to ask, how do you maintain the grit? How do you maintain the day-to-day motivation to run the startup, to run life, to keep on providing value? How do you do that?
I think that's a very easy answer. And that this comes back to the idea of focusing on making your users happy or your customers happy and solving their problems. Because when you focus on that, more often than not, there is a feedback loop.
Okay.
And that feedback loop returns some sort of understanding if your assumption that you are solving a problem and making someone happy is correct or not. So what keeps me motivated is exactly that feedback, because when we get a message saying, look, I love what you guys are doing, this helped me out so much, thank you. That makes me feel like, okay, look, this is not a giant waste of time, and we are on some right path, and it is worth every sleepless night, every problem that we're challenged to solve is worth it, because there's this group of people out there that appreciate that what we're doing is making their life better. And to me, that is the principle of company building as well, because it doesn't only hopefully reflect in your bottom line and in your revenues and everything else, but it also reflects in your team motivation. Like, all of us are motivated. When a message like that comes in, it gives the team a boost to say, look, you spent 5 hours doing something today. You spent 3 hours. I spent 6 hours, and it was all worth it because somebody is telling us, keep doing it, guys, because you helped me,
That's really, that feeling of accomplishment is really the thing, correct? It injects some endorphins and
exactly.
Kartik, as we move, where do you see Satsearch going? And one of these days I was like, oh, Kartik is opening up the Amazon of satellites and probably beyond that, okay? But what is your vision for Satsearch moving ahead? We talked about prior that you want to enable many people's dreams and projects. I'd like you to elaborate on that, Kartik, because right now and one of the things that we've also segues into this, I think, is that you said, let's procure better. Let's procure better, okay? And that comes down to something that you also talked about, that is, there are so many things in these finer details, in the graph shows this trillion economy, but there's so many things to solve. But essentially what I'm asking is, where do you see Satsearch going in your head or as a founder and providing value to the world?
Yeah, so I hope and I believe that we're on the path to becoming the company that makes this entire question of how an engineer finds information, how procurement happens, basically become boring, a non-issue. Nobody thinks about it because it's solved, it's done, there is Satsearch. I think, that is an ambition. I believe that if we make this problem boring, then people can focus their attention on other problems, right? And that is, I think, every company's role in some sense is to make the problem that they are solving boring, because that means that it's solved and people's attention can go elsewhere. So if I forecast, 5 years ahead or 10 years ahead, I see that for Satsearch, and with that then comes the fact that we become part of the fabric of the industry. Like, anybody's thinking about how do you procure, how does the marketplace work, how do transactions happen, how does how is sales driven, new opportunity driven, and it is a no-brainer. Well, Satsearch is there. This is not an unsolved problem. I would say, that's in many ways also what I guess Amazon's dominance in retail has done, right? It's a solved problem getting something delivered to your house, whatever it is. I need a pair of shoes. It's not a problem. And okay, that makes it lucrative to have competitors and other things. And I think that's another problem set. But the nature of the goal is you have reached the point at which the thing that you are doing has become just baked into everyday life. So that's where I see us kind of going. And I think the second piece of that is there's different gradations to that, right? Because we could help the people who are in the space industry today do their work better. But when I say that we are helping to make this a solved problem, I'm talking about holistically. Even the people who are not in the space industry, who don't have access to it, who don't even understand what they could do and operate within the space industry,
right.
that even that is a solved problem. So the common example that I give is if I'm a machine shop, right, and I've been producing automotive parts for many years. If we execute on the plans that we are looking forward to, then it becomes a solved problem for that machine shop to know whether they have a role in the space industry and in the space supply chain as well. Today, that is not a solved problem because somebody who is producing those parts, in fact, it's an unknown, like an automotive parts manufacturer. Do they even know? How do they know? And how can they answer the question, do I have a role in the space industry?
Yeah.
And to me, that becomes from an open marketplace and access to the market and understanding how to enter the market and where to drive opportunities. So yeah, in a very holistic sense for the industry as it is today, but also the industry that will be there 10 years from now, I see us as kind of just being woven into the fabric to say, you want to do business in the space sector, and even the definition of space sector can be very broad as a result, is a solved problem.
Okay, it just increases the wideness and the depth, correct, of Satsearch as a whole. With so much things, Kartik, what do you do when you are overwhelmed? Do you have like a thing that you do? Do you go outside for a walk? I don't know. What is your hack?
Yeah, so I had this kind of process of managing this pre-pandemic, and I think the pandemic really forced me to come up with some almost on the basis of survival instinct, being trapped inside your house. I think a lot of people have probably experienced this, is to come up with some sort of coping mechanism. So mine actually has been I have one day in the week that I don't touch anything.
Okay.
It is also a day that I typically try not to plan. And I have tried to come to peace with even the idea that if all I do and it's typically a Saturday, let's say Saturday afternoon, all I do is I'm lying on the couch doing nothing.
Lying on the couch.
Then I have come to a level of like understanding where I don't feel guilt over doing that. I don't feel any idea that I'm wasting time or whatever. And I see that as part of my restorative process, right? To give me some sort of relief from the everyday stress. So that's what I try to do. I try to maintain this kind of rhythm in which I know that there is that one day in which I'm more or less, of course, I stray a little bit and I maybe pick up my laptop, answer emails or whatever, but I try to be kind of deviceless on that day. And I try to not plan the day, or if I do, to do just completely other things. And the second thing is that, and this has been the hardest bit for me, which is to trust again in team. And, especially when you're in a founding team, you want to convey strength to everyone else in the team because you don't want to be showing them something that drags them down as well. But I actually learned the hard way that I was not actually respecting the rest of the team by not telling them when I was having a tough moment, and vice versa. And so we've grown together where, there is a deep level of trust where if I'm having a rough moment or a rough day, we talk, and most of the time, just the empathy of the other person hearing it and saying, I understand it. I don't know, it's not your fault, or I'll work with you and we'll fix it, or don't worry, just alleviates the immediate stress that I did something wrong, or everything is, everything is going wrong, or whatever it is. So these are the coping mechanisms that I found, is to rely on people, not to have this even maybe this ego or pride and to say, I need to solve everything myself. No, it's okay to lean on other people. And then to kind of find this recipe to break the rhythm. And I try to do that, as I said, mostly on Saturdays. I just step away from everything.
That's pretty interesting break, stop, and regenerate time to put the batteries. I got two things to ask you. I'm going to go into the first one, that is, do you have any words, mottos? You've talked about a lot of your team, the transparency, the vulnerability in there, but also being understanding that I want to work with someone. But is there some kind of a motto or quotes that you'd like to give to people that want to go into the space industry? Any message from your side that you'd like to bring in?
So specifically for the space industry, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, maybe something along the lines of seeing is believing. So, to kind of to not take other people's word for what is happening in the space industry, but to dig in and to find out for yourself. I say that because, as I said, it's not that I think that people are misleading others. It's just that it's such a nascent industry, particularly on the commercial side now, and the dynamics are such that it's what I call happy chaos. So in some sense, everybody's trying to figure out what's going on.
Happy chaos, Kartik. I've got so many things. That's a cool one.
Yeah. So, chaos is generally associated with something negative, but so that's why I add the word happy, because I think it's chaos for sure in my mind and in my perception, but it's happy chaos because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to grow and to do things, new things. And I would say in that happy chaos, there are going to be some truths and there are going to be some opinions. And my slogan, motto, or whatever is figure it out yourself. Like, don't rely on others, and even if somebody is correct about it, it's still better to go and validate it yourself in one way or another, whether it's talking to potential customers, suppliers, partners, investors, whoever it is or even team members, right? Like, I think more than even other industries, like well-established industries, because the space industry has so many things that are in flux at the moment, you need to anchor on something. And I think the best thing to anchor on is something that you see and feel and touch, and not do that by proxy through somebody else.
Okay. That leads to I'm going to call it my last question, at least from this conversation. Is there a space hack, or is this your space hack? Is seeing and believing? Is that a space hack that you say, that's it, I found a way to get there that no one has seen, or this is the thing that you'd like to describe?
I mean, I have a tip or a hack, but it's quite biased because it fits into the worldview that we have with Satsearch, of course, right? Okay. So it's difficult for me to divorce the vision for Satsearch from that.
Go ahead, please.
So my hack is to be open. So I'm talking about if you're a supplier in particular, and you're a supplier delivering some product or service or some widget or whatever it is to be radically open and transparent, to put yourself in the position of your potential customer, and to think about how can I minimize, if not eliminate, any level of frustration for this person to engage with us. And the reason I'm saying that I'm biased is because that is entirely the philosophy for Satsearch, of course, right? Is that we're trying to open data, because I firmly believe that is what will drive, especially the commercial enterprise, is reducing the barriers to doing business. And I think there's still a lot of companies that are very protective, the sort of, you need to sign an NDA before I will even, speak to you for more than 5 seconds kind of a thing. And we see that changing. And we're kind of a forcing function trying to change it as well, because we believe that is the better market to be in. But I think independent of that, at least from the evidence we've seen, is that the companies that are kind of radically open that way, where they provide their technical specifications and data sheets and interface control documents and CAD models and their testing information and qualification information,
okay,
all of that open, which I acknowledge, companies have to decide where do they draw the line to keep stuff that is business proprietary versus stuff that becomes part of their tool set to, in their sales and marketing approach and BD. But I do think that the industry is nowhere near that question of like, is this too much information sharing? Like, we're very much on the extreme of like sharing very little. And I think new companies entering this market can distinguish themselves in number one, that, and in number two, customer service and being open about how they work with customers. And it's all about inspiring confidence and trust, basically, on the buy side.
You mentioned when we talked that a problem sometimes gets sorted in the SAT industry with the 2 years lead time. And that was like, and Kartik, I'm, again, transparent, I was like 2 years lead time, but at the end of the 2 years, there will be not a problem because you not even have a customer. So that's, do you see that this openness of data is going to decrease that lead time? Because with 2 years, I don't even think we can plan a launch. It's or I'm going to miss the launch date or something on those terms. Do you see this as the hack to slash down lead times, and is that where you are going at?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is a little bit the vision that we have. So for instance, as a marketplace, right, we are attached at the hip to the market itself growing. Like a marketplace of like two people is not unless they are billionaires on both sides of the market, it's generally not an interesting market. So for us, we have a vested interest in the whole market growing. So if I think about that, for instance, one of the things that could help the market grow is to reduce the time between a commercial opportunity and a service provision, right? If I find a customer today that has a need and I can go and deploy a space asset and a service associated with that within 2 quarters, right? Which today is like insane unless it's an asset that's already flying, and operational, and I'm repurposing it or doing something with the data. But in principle, to go from something that is not designed, developed, launched, and operational to deploying and provisioning a commercial service in anything that is less than 12 months, and I would say anything less than even 2 years, is a very, very hard barrier in the space industry. So I have this radical idea, which is probably, I think every founder of every company has somewhere deep down in their head the crazy idea. And it's the idea that you're almost too embarrassed to say or ashamed of because it's so crazy, right? It's the mad scientist crazy idea. And in my mind, that idea that is sitting inside Satsearch is, can we get to a place where if there is a commercial need for the deployment and provisioning of a service that is based off of space assets, can you go from the identification of that commercial opportunity to the provisioning of that service in less than 6 months? And yeah, I think, there's many people in the industry, if you tell them this, they're like, it's impossible. They'll talk about it as though it is like breaking the laws of physics. But it's not breaking the laws of physics, it's breaking process. And okay, yes, there are, even in process, there's limitations. The example of, a woman that's pregnant, with a child for 9 months, you can't have 9 women carry a baby for 1 month. So of course, even in process, there's limitations on how much you can optimize. But I do believe that this forcing function on transparency and openness and traceability and reliability will allow us to drive towards these kinds of outcomes, having an ability for somebody to say, okay, you have a problem today. Let's sign a letter of intent or a contract. And if I can deploy this solution in less than 90 days, our contract comes into force. The space industry generally can't do that at the moment. And I think this is the barrier to true commercialization as well, because as you said, if you tell me you have the problem and I tell you, great, let's sign the letter of intent and I'll be back in 5 years. Okay, dude. Have a great life. I'll see you later.
Kartik, this is a great vision and hack, and I took so many notes. Okay, again, Kartik, I'm gonna end our time for today in here. I do want to emphasize that Satsearch as behind the concept. Behind the concept, it has a very immediate practical utility. You guys can go log into their website. And I've tried this, write down names and start seeing things like, oh, this is really cool. It's really easy to see parts. But the whole idea that you are bringing it is decreasing on a tenfold the rate or even more. And again, Kartik, and I didn't know about this, and as we were talking, there is this gold thing or stellar, oh, space is it's going to happen all over the place, probably because of that report. But there are so many things to solve. And this simple thing, having parts, having engineers doing their work, man, that you're trying to solve, I think it's awesome. And we talked about leaving time for the engineers and other people to do other work and facilitating that. And that's really an awesome, man, it's an awesome mission. Thanks for having the time to share with me, okay, as I'm also growing in the space industry. Your approach to process improvement is I'm gonna say that it's the right one. I'm gonna slash these in a tenfold thing. That's a mind shifting, correct? Because then that way you're not thinking about, oh, next year is gonna be 5% better. 5% better in a 2 years time, it's 5 times 24. It's 1 month. Come on, there is no. So thanks for this. And do you have any departing words that you'd like to give?
Yeah, no. So firstly, thanks for this conversation and for inviting me. And I've also learned a lot thinking, reflecting is always also a good exercise because it helps clarify your thoughts. So thanks for inviting me. And maybe, the thing that I want to kind of mention as maybe my parting gift from this conversation, which is the topics that we've talked about are an invitation for people who are not in the space industry today to step in. Because these things are not going to happen unless the workforce in the industry expands across multiple domains, multiple skill sets, with diversity, across multiple geographies. So what I think, especially for people who are listening, who are not in the space industry today, who are maybe professionals in other sectors, that I would like to give them sort of as a parting word of encouragement is there is a place for you in this industry, but more than that, the industry needs you, because a lot of the core challenges are not going to be solved if there aren't people who have, for instance, process expertise, expertise in industrialization of production lines, expertise in business processes and process optimization. And I'm giving the comment on process, but of course, in many different domains and departments of an organization, these skill sets need to be added to the industry. So that's my kind of call to action is if anybody's listening that is not in the space sector and you're wondering, is there a place for me? I would say, even without necessarily knowing who you are and what your CV is and what you're doing, the industry is in a position of a dearth of talent, and the workforce has to grow. I mean, the workforce has to grow by, I would say, even orders of magnitude to be able to achieve some of the dreams, the kind of growth that people are talking about. So yeah, please take a serious step if you have an intent to look towards the space industry. And I'm happy to also help people navigate that if they want. They can ping me personally on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever. Yeah, because I think it's exciting. There's a lot of things going on and a lot of new opportunities emerging as a result.
Kartik, definitely will have more people ping you. I'll be doing that as well. But I'll have more people ping you and this. And that definitely motivates me. Thank you very much for this, Kartik. Okay, and enjoy the time in here. So you've met Kartik now. He is an inspiration. His company is doing something really, really different, bringing this trust model, bringing people into new ways of working, facilitating exchange of information, breaking down a lot of barriers. That's Kartik and Satsearch. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to our channel. Go and talk with Kartik. Talk with me if you need to. But most of all, enjoy your space journey. We are here to stay.